The summer wedding was in full swing when I first laid eyes on Caroline. It was one of those events that seems pulled straight from a glossy magazine, white drapery fluttering in the gentle breeze, the scent of roses mingling with freshly cut grass, and a string quartet providing a delicate backdrop. I had flown in from Oslo, where I'd been buried in work. The wedding was a perfect escape, a chance to reconnect with old friends and, as fate would have it, to meet someone who would change my life. I spotted Caroline at a table near the center of the reception area. She was laughing, her head tilted back, eyes sparkling as she chatted animatedly with Melanie and Tom. I had known Melanie and Tom for years, but Caroline was new to me. She wore a teal dress that complemented her light brown hair, which fell in soft waves over her shoulders. There was an ease about her that caught my attention. She seemed at ease in a way that was both refreshing and magnetic. As the evening progressed, I found myself drifting closer to her table, my curiosity piqued. I tried not to be too obvious, but I couldn't help stealing glances. At one point, Caroline caught my eye and gave me a warm, friendly smile. It was as though she sensed my interest and, rather than shying away, welcomed it. "Hey there," she said, her voice like a pleasant melody. "I don't think we've met." "I'm Caroline," I introduced myself, feeling a bit like a deer caught in the headlights. "Glenn. I'm actually a friend of Melanie and Tom." "Ah, so you're the elusive Glenn they'd been talking about," she said with a playful grin. "Nice to finally meet you." The conversation flowed effortlessly from there. We talked about everything from the wedding itself to our respective work lives. Caroline had a knack for making everything sound interesting. She spoke passionately about her love for art and her dream of traveling to see famous galleries around the world. "So, you're an industrial engineer?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Yep," I replied. "It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Lots of spreadsheets and calculations. But it has its moments." "I can imagine," she said, laughing softly. "I'm an interior designer, so I'm always trying to make things look pretty. Sometimes I think we might be on opposite ends of the spectrum." "Maybe," I said, chuckling. "But I bet your work makes people's lives a bit more beautiful." Caroline's smile widened. "That's the goal. And I guess you're making sure things work smoothly behind the scenes. It's a team effort, really." As the evening wore on, we found ourselves gravitating toward each other. The wedding guests began to thin out, and we ended up sitting side by side at the bar. The chatter around us softened, and it felt as though the rest of the world had faded away. "So, what's a Scandinavian like you doing at a wedding in the middle of summer?" Caroline asked, raising her eyebrow playfully. "I came back to visit friends. I've been working in Oslo for the past few months. Needed a break from the grind." "Oslo sounds lovely," she said thoughtfully. "I've always wanted to visit Norway." "Do you think it's as beautiful as everyone says?" "Absolutely," I said. "But I'd be lying if I said I had much time to enjoy it. Mostly just work, work, and more work." Caroline nodded sympathetically. "I get that. Sometimes I feel like I'm just designing spaces for other people's lives. I forget to live my own." There was a moment of silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like we were both taking in the gravity of what we'd just shared. I could sense that Caroline was more than just a pretty face with a warm smile. There was depth there, and it intrigued me. The night ended with us exchanging numbers. As we said our goodbyes, Caroline looked at me with a mixture of warmth and curiosity. "Let's not be strangers," she said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I'd like to hear more about that Norwegian adventure of yours." "Deal," I replied, smiling. "And I'd like to hear more about your dreams of becoming a world traveler." Little did I know, that simple exchange would set the stage for everything that followed. The spark between us was undeniable, and from that night on, it felt like we were on a journey together, one that would lead us to both highs and lows we couldn't have imagined. Life seemed to settle into a comfortable routine after Caroline and I moved in together. Our small apartment quickly became our haven, a cozy space with mismatched furniture that we made into our own. We'd spend weekends cooking meals together, binge-watching our favorite shows, and planning future adventures. It felt like we were building something real and lasting. But then, the company I worked for hit a rough patch. I remember the day it all started to unravel. I was at the office, reviewing a new project plan, when my manager called me into his office. The room felt colder than usual, and his expression was grave. "Glenn," he began, "I'm afraid I have some bad news. We've had to make some tough decisions, and unfortunately, your position is one of the cuts." My heart sank. I tried to keep my composure as we discussed severance and the next steps. I remember walking out of the office feeling numb, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on my shoulders. When I got home that evening, Caroline was already there, sprawled out on the couch, flipping through a design magazine. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but I noticed a hint of concern as I sat down beside her. "Hey," she said, reaching out to hold my hand. "How was work?" I took a deep breath. "Not great. They let me go." Caroline's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a supportive smile. "Oh, Glenn, I'm so sorry. What's the plan?" "I've got a severance package that should cover us for a few months," I said. "But I'll need to start looking for something new right away." Caroline nodded, though I could sense a shift in her demeanor. "We'll get through this. We've been through tough times before, right?" "Right," I agreed, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Over the next few weeks, the strain of unemployment began to take its toll. I was applying for jobs daily, going on interviews, and spending countless hours networking. Meanwhile, our savings were dwindling faster than I'd anticipated. I suggested we cut back on non-essential expenses, but Caroline didn't seem to take it seriously. One evening, Caroline came home excited, practically bubbling over with enthusiasm. "Guess what? Melanie and Tom invited me to see a show in Copenhagen with them next month. It's going to be amazing." I tried to muster up a smile, but my heart sank. "That sounds great, but we're on a tight budget right now. Maybe it's something we should reconsider." Caroline's face fell slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Glenn, it's just one trip. It's not like I'm asking for a new wardrobe or anything. Besides, I've been looking forward to this for months." "I understand," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "But right now, every bit helps. I'm worried about the expenses piling up. Can't we find a compromise?" Caroline's expression hardened a bit. "You're the one who lost your job. I've been working hard, too. I need this break. Maybe you should focus on finding a job instead of worrying about what I'm doing." Her words stung, and the warmth I had felt between us seemed to cool. It wasn't just about the trip, it was the way she dismissed my concerns. Later that week, things became even more strained. Caroline came home one night, exhausted and irritable. She threw her keys onto the kitchen counter and flopped down onto a chair. "I don't get why you're making such a big deal out of everything," she snapped. "I work hard, too. Why do I have to feel guilty for wanting to enjoy myself?" "I'm not saying you can't enjoy yourself," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we're in a rough patch, and it feels like you're not on the same page." Caroline sighed and rubbed her temples. "Maybe you're just not seeing the bigger picture. I need something to look forward to. I'm feeling overwhelmed, too, you know." I could see the frustration in her eyes, but it didn't lessen the impact of her words. We were supposed to be a team, and it felt like we were drifting apart. As the weeks went on, the tension between us grew. We were both stressed, but our coping mechanisms were worlds apart. I was trying to hold on to any semblance of stability, while Caroline seemed determined to escape our problems rather than face them. The cracks in our relationship were becoming more evident, and I felt like I was losing the connection that had once seemed so effortless. I had hoped we could weather this storm together, but instead, it felt like we were being pulled in different directions. The love and understanding we had once shared were now overshadowed by misunderstandings and unmet expectations. And though I was still holding on to hope, the distance between us was growing harder to ignore. The days after Caroline's return from her trip to Copenhagen were filled with a palpable tension. She seemed to slip back into her routine with a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was still trying to find work, but the strain of our financial situation was starting to wear on me. And though Caroline was home, her focus seemed increasingly distant. I found myself fixated on our interactions, reading into every little detail. I was haunted by the feeling that something wasn't right. My suspicion only grew when Melanie, our mutual friend, started avoiding me and Tom seemed more distant than usual. One chilly evening, I decided to reach out to Melanie. We had been close for years, and I hoped she could shed some light on what was happening. I asked her to meet me for coffee, and though she was hesitant at first, she agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Melanie arrived looking slightly uncomfortable, her eyes scanning the room before she finally spotted me. I waved her over. "Hey, Melanie," I said as she sat down. "Thanks for meeting with me. I needed to talk." Melanie took a deep breath. "What's going on, Glenn?" "I've been feeling like something's off with Caroline," I admitted. "It's just a gut feeling, but I can't shake it. I need to know if I'm overreacting." Melanie shifted in her seat, her expression troubled. "Glenn, I don't know how to tell you this, but..." "Just tell me," I interrupted, my heart pounding. "I need to know." Melanie glanced around the cafe nervously before leaning in closer. "There's been talk about Caroline and Michael. People have seen them together a lot, more than just as friends." I didn't want to believe it myself, but there have been rumors. My heart sank. Michael was someone I had considered a friend, and the idea of Caroline being involved with him felt like a betrayal on multiple levels. I stared at Melanie, trying to process what she was saying. "Do you think it's true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know for sure," Melanie said. "But I've heard enough to be concerned. I think you need to talk to Caroline about it." That night, I confronted Caroline. The tension between us was thick as I sat her down in our living room, the warm light of the lamps contrasting sharply with the chill in the air. "Caroline," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you about something. Melanie mentioned that there's been some talk about you and Michael." Caroline's face immediately tensed. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice a mix of defensiveness and surprise. "People have seen you together a lot," I continued, trying to remain calm. "Is there something going on between you two?" Caroline looked away, her fingers gripping the edge of the sofa. "Glenn, I didn't think this would come up." "It's not what you think." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Caroline took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "Michael and we had a brief affair. It was a mistake, something I deeply regret. But it doesn't change the fact that I still care about you." My world seemed to tilt. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal all at once. "You care about me? After everything? I trusted you, Caroline." "I know," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I was trying to escape from the stress, from everything that was happening. It was wrong, but I want to fix this. I want us to work through it." "How?" I asked, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. "How do we fix this when the trust is broken? When everything feels like a lie?" Caroline reached out, her hand trembling. "Please, Glenn. Let's try. We can go to counseling, talk this through. I don't want to lose you." I pulled away, feeling overwhelmed. "I need time to think. I don't even know what to believe anymore." As Caroline left the room, I sat alone in the dim light, grappling with the enormity of what I had just learned. The foundation of our relationship had crumbled, and I was left to navigate the wreckage. The person I had thought I knew so well had hidden a part of herself from me, and the betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. The discovery about Caroline's affair was a crushing blow, but it wasn't until I received the results of the DNA test that everything truly fell apart. I had been trying to hold on to some semblance of normalcy, but the uncertainty about Alice's paternity gnawed at me. After the affair came to light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The day the results arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope. Caroline had gone out for a meeting with her lawyer, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I carefully opened the envelope, my hands shaking slightly. The document inside was clinical, devoid of emotion, but it held the weight of my entire world. The results confirmed what I had dreaded: Alice was not my biological child. I stared at the words on the page, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Alice, my little girl who had brought so much joy into my life, was not my own flesh and blood. When Caroline returned home, I was sitting on the couch, the results spread out in front of me. She looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and hope. "Hey, Glenn," she said softly. "How did it go?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I slid the document over to her. "You should see this." Caroline's face paled as she read the results. Her hands trembled, and she sat down heavily beside me. "Glenn, I didn't want it to come to this. I was hoping we could work things out before you found out." "Work things out?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. "How do we work this out? This isn't just about us anymore. This is about Alice." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I'm so sorry. I thought I could keep everything together, but I failed. I never meant for it to get this far." "I need to know," I said, my voice strained. "Who is Alice's father?" Caroline hesitated, looking away. "It's Michael. He's the father." "It was a mistake, a huge mistake." I nodded slowly, feeling a wave of numbness wash over me. "So all this time, I've been raising someone else's child, and I didn't even know. How am I supposed to deal with this?" Caroline reached out, her voice breaking. "Glenn, please. I know I've hurt you. But I want you to know that you've been an incredible father to Alice. She loves you. I love you, love," I said bitterly. "It feels like everything was a lie. How can I trust anything anymore?" Caroline's tears flowed freely now. "I understand if you need to leave. I wouldn't blame you. But I hope you'll still be a part of Alice's life. She needs you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "I need time to process this. I need to figure out what's best for Alice." The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, emotional conversations, and the painful task of disentangling our lives. I met with a lawyer to discuss the implications of the situation. It wasn't just about the emotional fallout, there were legal considerations, too. In one of our meetings, my lawyer, a middle-aged woman with a kind but no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the situation. "So, Glenn," she said, looking over her glasses. "The fact that you're not Alice's biological father complicates things. However, you have been her primary caregiver and have developed a strong bond with her." "I want to stay in her life," I said firmly. "She's been my daughter in every way that matters. I just need to make sure her well-being is protected." The lawyer nodded. "It's important to establish your role legally, especially in terms of visitation rights and emotional support. We'll need to file for legal guardianship or something similar, depending on what you and Caroline agree on." The process was exhausting and emotionally draining. Every step was a reminder of the love I had for Alice and the shattered trust between Caroline and me. Despite the heartbreak, I knew that stepping away from Alice was not an option. One evening, as I prepared to move out of our apartment, Caroline and I sat down for a final conversation about Alice. "I want to be clear," I said, my voice steady. "I will always be there for Alice. I want to support her, be a father figure. But I can't stay with you. Not after everything that's happened." Caroline nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'm so sorry for everything, Glenn. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever fix. I hope you find a way to make things right," I said, standing up. "For Alice's sake, and for your own." As I walked out of the apartment for the last time, I glanced back at the place where so many memories had been made. The future felt uncertain, but one thing was clear: my love for Alice remained unchanged. No matter what came next, I would be there for her, and that was a commitment I intended to honor, no matter how painful the journey had become.